Derek Slater signed 11 documents the morning his career ended. He read none of them. He moved through them the way he moved through everything, fast, certain, with the confidence of a man who had never been wrong long enough to learn what being wrong actually costs. The 11th document was a single page, a removal authorization, Box 114 Harlan Savings and Trust, scheduled for liquidation as part of the branch renovation project. His assistant had flagged it twice. He initialed it without looking up from his phone. That was a Tuesday in October 2024. To understand what happened next, you have to go back to a different Tuesday. 27 years earlier, a morning when a man named Virgil Boone walked through those same doors for the first time, and nobody in that building had the faintest idea that the moment mattered. Virgil was 41 years old in 1997. He did not look 41. He looked like a man who had been doing hard work since before hard work had a name. His hands told a story before he opened his mouth, thick across the knuckles, scarred at the base of the thumb from a hydraulic line that had failed on him 14 years earlier out in a hollow near Bledsoe. His boots were laced wrong on the left foot, the way a man laces his boots when his mind is somewhere else entirely. His flannel shirt was faded at the elbows, washed so many times the pattern had gone soft, like something seen through old glass. He had driven 40 minutes to get there, not because Harlan Savings and Trust was the closest bank. It was not, but because Roland Keller had built it, and Virgil Boone had known Roland Keller since they were 17 years old, running fence line together on the Keller family property the summer before Roland went to college and Virgil stayed behind to help his father keep the farm. Loyalty is a strange thing. It does not announce itself. It does not ask to be seen. It simply accumulates, the way silt accumulates at the bend of a river, quietly, without ceremony, until one day you look and there is something solid where there used to be nothing. Virgil walked to the counter and asked to speak to someone about a safe deposit box. The woman behind the desk was named Patricia. She had worked at that branch for 6 years, and she was good at reading people. She looked at Virgil the way people look at a man whose presence does not immediately add up. The worn clothes against the quiet steadiness in his eyes, the muddy boots against the careful way he set his envelope on the counter. She would remember him later, not because anything unusual happened that day, because nothing did, because he signed the paperwork, took the key, paid the first month in cash, $50 exactly, folded from a clip in his front pocket, and left. The whole transaction took 11 minutes. Safe deposit box number 114. 3 rows back. Second shelf from the bottom. Dorothy had been gone for 3 months by then. She had gone in July, a Wednesday, just after noon, in a room at the Harlan ARH hospital with a window that faced east. The cancer did not negotiate. It did not give a man time to prepare. Virgil had sat beside her bed for 19 days. He did not leave except to wash his face and change his shirt in the hospital bathroom at 4 in the morning when the nurses changed shifts and the hallway was quiet enough that he could stand at the sink and look at himself in the mirror without having to explain to anyone what he saw there. She had been 39 years old. They had built the farmhouse together in 1983, the two of them and Owen Briggs and Owen's younger brother Carl, who was good with a level but terrible with a hammer, and who had driven a 16-penny nail clean through his own work boot on the 3rd day and never let anyone forget it. The house sat on 80 acres in the northeast corner of Harlan County, land that Virgil had earned through 14 years of contract work for the USDA Appalachian Farmland Recovery Program, a federal initiative that had operated quietly through the 1980s and early 1990s, sending men with mechanical knowledge into the hill counties to restore farming equipment on land that had been damaged by flooding, strip mining runoff, and 2 decades of neglect. Virgil was not a farmer by training. He was a mechanic. He understood machines the way some men understand music, not just the notes, but the space between them, the reason a valve sounds different at altitude, the way a worn bearing will tell you 3 weeks before it fails if you know how to listen. He had rebuilt combines that other men had given up on. He had fabricated parts from salvage when the manufacturer no longer made them. He had spent 14 years driving a government truck through creek hollows and ridge roads that barely deserved the name, stopping at farms where the only working tractor was 30 years old and held together by wire and stubbornness. And he had fixed what needed fixing and moved on to the next hollow and never asked for recognition because recognition was not why he did it. In 1991, the USDA had formalized what had always been informal. They had drawn up a land grant certification, Federal Farmland Preservation Program, case file 1991-KY-0047, signed by the regional USDA director and notarized, conveying clear legal title to 80 acres in Harlan County to Virgil James Boone in recognition of 14 years of meritorious service to federal agricultural recovery operations. The document had been drafted by a government attorney in Lexington, witnessed by 2 federal employees whose names Virgil could not have told you if asked, and delivered to him in a manila envelope on a Thursday afternoon with no ceremony whatsoever, which was exactly the kind of delivery Virgil would have chosen if anyone had asked. He put the document in the top drawer of the desk in the farmhouse. Dorothy framed the accompanying letter of commendation and hung it in the kitchen next to the window that faced the garden. They had 8 good years after that. The farm did not make them rich. It was never meant to. But it fed them, and it held them. And on summer evenings, when the light came low across the east field and the katydids started up in the tree line, Virgil would sit on the porch, and Dorothy would bring 2 glasses of sweet tea, and they would watch the field go gold, and neither of them felt the need to say anything about it, because some things are understood without being spoken. Then July 1997. Then the hospital room facing east. Then the drive home alone on a Wednesday afternoon with the windows down because he could not stand the silence of a closed car, and the particular cruelty of arriving back at a house that still smelled like the person who would not be returning to it. He went to the bank that October, not because he had planned it for months. He went because of what had happened in September. Roland Keller had called him on a Sunday evening. Not to chat. Roland did not call on Sundays to chat. His voice had the careful steadiness of a man who has rehearsed a difficult conversation and is still not certain he can get through it. He told Virgil that the bank was in trouble, not theoretical trouble, real trouble. A loan portfolio that had gone bad in the agricultural collapse of the mid-90s. A regulatory review that had found 2 reporting errors that were honest mistakes but did not look like honest mistakes on paper, and a capital shortfall that needed to be addressed before the end of the quarter, or the FDIC would be having a different kind of conversation with the board. He told Virgil he was not calling to ask for help. He was calling because Virgil deserved to know, as a friend, what was happening. Virgil asked him how much. Roland said it did not matter. Virgil asked him again. There was a long pause. $47,000. Roland said, "That is the number that would give us room to work through the rest. But Virgil, I am not asking you for that." Virgil was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would come by Monday morning. He came by Monday morning. He had driven to the Harlan County Farm Bureau Credit Union the Friday before and withdrawn the money, $47,000. It was the money from the sale of the cattle in 1994, the money from 3 years of contract payments he had not spent. The money Dorothy had kept in an envelope in the flour canister for emergencies because she did not entirely trust banks, which, given the present circumstances, struck Virgil as the kind of irony Dorothy herself would have appreciated. He set the cashier's checks on Roland's desk. Roland looked at them for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Virgil, I cannot take this," Virgil said. "You are not taking it. I am lending it. There is a difference." They drew up the agreement that afternoon. Roland's personal attorney drafted it. Owen Briggs came in after 4 o'clock when his shift ended and notarized it in his capacity as a commissioned notary public for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, a certification he had held for 11 years and renewed faithfully every 4 years because Owen Briggs was a man who believed in having his paperwork in order. The agreement specified the terms of repayment, the interest rate, which Virgil had set at 0, and a separate provision that Roland had insisted on, a protection clause, which stated that in perpetuity, For as long as Harlan Savings and Trust operated under any name or ownership structure, no action of the bank or its agents could be taken against any asset of Virgil James Boone, including but not limited to his land, his accounts, and any safe deposit box held in his name, without a court order from a Kentucky Circuit Court judge. Virgil had not asked for the clause. Roland had written it himself. Roland said, "A man who does what you just did deserves to know that what is his will stay his." They shook hands. 3 days later, Virgil drove to the bank and rented Box 114. He placed inside it the USDA land grant certification, the original loan agreement, the signed protection clause, a cassette tape that Roland had recorded that same week, speaking slowly and clearly into a small Sony recorder, confirming the nature of the arrangement, the terms, and the protection clause, with Roland's voice identifying himself by full name, title, and the date. Virgil had sealed the tape in a Ziploc freezer bag before placing it in the box. He had wrapped the documents in acid-free paper because Dorothy had once told him that acid-free paper was what museums used to preserve things that mattered, and he had never forgotten it. He locked the box. He put the key on the same ring as his truck key, where it remained for the next 27 years. The bank recovered. Roland repaid the $47,000 in full by the spring of 2001. Virgil deposited the checks without comment, and they had lunch at the diner on Cumberland Avenue, and Roland ordered the same thing he always ordered, which was the hot beef sandwich with extra gravy, and Virgil had the coffee and pie. And they talked about the farm, and Roland's youngest daughter who had just been accepted to the University of Kentucky. And they did not talk about the money because the money was finished, and there was no reason to keep talking about a finished thing. Roland Keller died in February 2003. Heart attack. 61 years old. The month after Roland died, Virgil drove to the bank and asked to access Box 114. He sat alone in the small room they gave you for privacy, and he opened the box, and he checked every document, and he played the first 30 seconds of the cassette tape on the small player he had brought in his jacket pocket, and then he sealed everything back the way it had been and locked the box, and drove home and did not go back for 21 years. He paid the $50 every month without exception. The automatic payment came out of his checking account, which he had set up in 2008 at the suggestion of a young teller named Carla, who had explained online bill pay to him with the patience of someone explaining a foreign language to a person who is listening carefully but reserves the right to remain skeptical. He never missed a payment. The box just sat there, 3 rows back, second shelf from the bottom, in a building that changed around it, that repainted its lobby twice, that replaced its carpet and its teller windows and its logo and its signage and eventually its entire management structure when Roland's successor retired in 2016 and the board brought in a man named Derek Slater from a bank in Cincinnati. Slater was 40 years old when he took the job at Harlan Savings and Trust. He had an MBA from Ohio State, not Harvard, though he had mentioned Harvard in 3 separate conversations during his first month at the branch in ways that did not hold up under scrutiny. He wore good shoes. He drove a car that was too clean for Harlan County roads, and he knew it and did not care because caring about that kind of thing was not in his professional vocabulary. He was not a bad man in the way that requires malice. He was a bad man in the way that requires only the absence of imagination, the inability to conceive that the world extends beyond the boundaries of his own understanding of how things work and what things are worth. He had a formula. The formula had worked in Cincinnati, and it had worked in Columbus before that, and it would work in Harlan because formulas did not care about geography. In his first 2 years, he had trimmed costs and improved the loan-to-deposit ratio and received a commendation from the regional vice president, and he had earned all of it, and he knew it, and that knowing had calcified into something that looked like confidence from the outside, but was, underneath, a kind of deafness. He became aware of Virgil Boone the way you become aware of a splinter. Not all at once, gradually, through accumulation. The expansion project had been in planning since early 2022. A new building, a full-service branch with drive-through lanes and a financial advisory suite and a conference room on the second floor with a view of the downtown. The location was ideal. The projections were solid. And the one problem, the single unresolved variable in an otherwise clean equation, was a parcel of 80 acres on Route 421 whose owner had not responded to 3 certified letters and 2 phone calls from the bank's real estate consultant. Slater drove out himself in September 2023. He came alone, which was not caution, it was certainty. He did not bring a lawyer because he did not expect to need one. He brought a folder with 2 documents inside, a preliminary offer letter and a draft purchase agreement, because he believed in having the paperwork ready so that when the conversation went where he expected it to go, there would be no delay. The farmhouse was smaller than he expected. The porch needed painting on the south side. There was an old Chevy truck parked on the gravel beside the barn, red once, faded now to something that was more memory than color, and a man sitting on the top porch step with a cup of coffee who watched the car come up the drive and did not stand up. Slater introduced himself. Virgil listened. Slater explained the project. Virgil listened. Slater presented the offer. $1.2 million for the 80 acres. Cash transaction. 60-day close. Full relocation assistance. Virgil looked at the folder being held out toward him and did not take it. He said, "No, thank you." Slater waited for the rest of the sentence. There was no rest of the sentence. He said, "Mr. Boone, I think if you look at the numbers here, you will see that this is a significant premium over assessed value," Virgil said. "I am sure it is." Slater said, "The land has some deferred maintenance issues that would affect any independent appraisal. We are offering above what the market would support," Virgil said. "I appreciate that," Slater said. "Then you will consider it." Virgil looked out at the east field for a moment. The light was coming through the tree line at the far edge, long and low and particular to that hour, the kind of light that a man who has watched it every evening for 30 years does not need to describe because description would only diminish it. He said, "Some things are not for sale. That is not a negotiating position. It is just the truth." Slater drove back to town. He told himself the old man was playing a game he had seen before. Resistance as leverage. The price would go up, and eventually the number would land somewhere acceptable, and the project would move forward. He had seen it a dozen times. He raised the offer to $1.8 million in November. Virgil declined by mail. One sentence. "Thank you for the offer. It remains my position that the land is not for sale." By January 2024, Slater had stopped believing it was about price. He hired a research firm out of Lexington. He asked them to find out everything there was to know about Virgil James Boone, his land, his financial history, any liens or disputes or vulnerabilities in the title record. He told them he was conducting routine due diligence on a potential acquisition. The firm came back with a thin file. No liens, no disputes. A USDA certification from 1991 that appeared to convey clean title. An unremarkable credit history. One outstanding item of interest, a safe deposit box at Harlan Savings and Trust, account number 114, continuously maintained since October 1997 with no record of contents and a notation in the legacy system that read third-party legal hold. See original file 1997-KTL-B114. Slater pulled the original file. It was a paper record, actual paper, in a manila folder in a filing cabinet in the document storage room on the lower level, the kind of filing cabinet that nobody had opened in years because everything since 2004 was digital and the paper records were maintained out of regulatory obligation rather than expectation of use. The file was thin. The legal hold notation had been placed by the law firm of Keller and Associates in October 1997. The named attorney was a man named Graham Holt, who had been Roland Keller's personal lawyer and who had, according to the Kentucky Bar Association records, retired in 2009. Slater read the file 3 times. Then he called his branch attorney and asked what a third-party legal hold on a safe deposit box actually meant in practical terms. The attorney told him it meant that any access to the box without a court order from a Kentucky Circuit Court judge would constitute a violation of the hold and could expose the bank to serious civil liability. Slater asked what the process would be to obtain such an order. The attorney said it would require a demonstrated legal interest and would likely take 3 to 6 months. Slater asked if there was another approach. There was a pause. The attorney said, "Derek, the correct approach is to file for the court order." Slater said, "I understand that. I am asking if there is another approach." There was a longer pause. The attorney said, "I would advise strongly against any other approach." Slater thanked him and ended the call. He sat at his desk and looked at the file. He thought about the 80 acres on Route 421. He thought about the conference room on the second floor, with the view of the downtown that existed on a set of architectural drawings in the third drawer of his credenza. He thought about the regional vice president's voice on the phone 6 weeks ago, asking for a project update, and the way that voice had carried, underneath the professional language, the particular tone of a man who is beginning to recalculate his assessment of someone. He thought about a 68-year-old farmer who sat on a porch step and said some things are not for sale, as if that were a complete sentence. He pulled the removal authorization form from the renovation file that his assistant had prepared. He filled in box 114. He signed it. He put it in the out tray. His assistant would process it in the morning. Down the hall, in the open office where the junior staff worked, a woman named May Carver was shutting down her computer for the evening. She was 34 years old and had worked at the branch for 3 years, and she was good at her job in the specific way that people are good at jobs when they pay attention to details that other people consider beneath their attention. She had noticed the third-party legal hold notation on box 114 6 months ago when she had been running a routine audit of legacy accounts. She had flagged it internally and filed the flag and moved on because that was the procedure and she trusted the procedure. She did not know what was in the out tray down the hall. She would find out in the morning. Outside, on Route 421, the farmhouse was dark except for the kitchen window. Virgil was at the table with a cup of coffee and a station out of Knoxville playing low on the radio. Older music, the kind that did not ask anything of you. The key ring sat on the table beside him. The truck key and the small brass key for box 114, worn smooth now at the teeth from 27 years of being carried in his pocket. He had not been back to the bank since 2003. He had not needed to be. The land knew what it was without being told. It did not require his worry or his vigilance or his explanation. It simply held, the way things hold when they have been properly arranged, patient and still and entirely certain of themselves through whatever season arrived to test them. He finished his coffee. He turned off the kitchen light. In a filing room on the lower level of Harlan Savings and Trust, in a folder inside a manila sleeve, inside a cabinet that had not been opened in 11 years. The document with Roland Keller's signature sat exactly where it had always been, waiting for someone to need it. May Carver arrived at 7:43 the next morning, 11 minutes before her scheduled start, which was how she always arrived. She made coffee in the break room, checked her messages, and sat down at her desk. She opened the processing queue for the day. The removal authorization for box 114 was third in the stack. She read it once, then she read it again. She pulled up the legacy account record on her screen. The third-party legal hold notation was still there, exactly where she had flagged it 6 months ago. She checked the flag. It had been reviewed and cleared by someone in compliance. The clearance note said routine legacy hold, no active litigation, cleared for standard processing. She sat with that for a moment. She printed the removal authorization. She printed the account record with the legal hold notation. She placed both pages face down on her desk and walked to the break room and refilled her coffee, even though it was not empty. She stood at the window that looked out onto the parking lot and watched a sparrow land on the hood of a silver sedan and then lift off again for no reason she could identify. She walked back to her desk. She picked up the printed pages. She carried them to the copy room and made one additional copy of each and folded them and put them in the inside pocket of her cardigan. Then she returned the originals to the processing stack and continued with her morning. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was a person who followed procedure, and procedure said the hold had been cleared and the authorization was signed, and her job was to process what was in front of her, not to second guess the branch manager over a filing notation that compliance had already reviewed. She processed the authorization at 9:17. By 9:40, the facility's crew had the work order. Virgil pulled into the bank parking lot at 10 past 10. He came on the second Wednesday of every month, not to access the box, just to make sure the account was in good standing, a habit he had maintained since 2004 when the branch switched to a new account management system and he had wanted to confirm the box was still properly registered. He came inside, nodded to May at her window, and asked to speak to someone about his account. May pulled up box 114. Her face did not change. She had spent 3 years learning how to keep her face exactly where she needed it. She told him the account was showing a processing flag and asked if he could wait a moment while she looked into it. He said he was not in a hurry. He sat in one of the chairs by the front window. He had brought a folded newspaper, the Harlan Daily Enterprise, 2 days old because he did not always get to town on publication day. He read the letters to the editor, which he considered the most honest section of any newspaper because people signed their names to what they actually believed rather than what they were paid to present. He read a letter from a woman in Cumberland who was unhappy about a proposed cell tower near her property. He read a letter from a man in Loyal who was very pleased with the new hours at the county library. He did not look toward the hallway that led to the document storage area. The newspaper was real, and his interest in it was real, and the quiet he carried in his body was the quiet of a man who has been waiting his whole life for various things and has long since made peace with the activity of waiting. Down the hall, the facilities crew had located box 114. The technician, a man named Curtis who had worked for the bank's maintenance contractor for 6 years and who was very good at his job and entirely indifferent to the reasons behind the jobs he was given, was examining the lock mechanism. Safe deposit box locks at Harlan Savings and Trust were dual key systems, requiring both the customer key and the bank's master key to open. In cases of authorized removal, the bank could apply to a locksmith to bypass the customer key. The locksmith had been called. He arrived at 10:22. The bypass took 4 minutes. At 10:26, box 114 was opened for the first time since March 2003. Curtis looked inside. He saw a tin box, small, olive green, the kind that might once have held tobacco or tea. He saw 4 envelopes, manila, sealed, stacked flat beneath it. He saw nothing else. He lifted the tin box out and set it on the table. That was when the alarm sounded. It was not a fire alarm. It was not the branch security system. It was a notification alarm. A digital alert that had been embedded in the account management system in 2004 when the branch converted its records. A flag that one of Roland Keller's attorneys had arranged to be placed in the system at that time. A flag that read access without court authorization triggers mandatory notification to file custodian. The file custodian of record for the 1997-KTEL-B114 legal hold was a law firm in Lexington, the successor firm to Keller and Associates, a firm called Holt and Mercer that had absorbed the old practice when Graham Holt retired and that had continued to receive the annual legal hold maintenance fee from the bank's legacy account obligations without anyone at the branch ever questioning what exactly they were maintaining. The notification went to Holt and Mercer at 10:27. A paralegal named Sandra opened it at 10:31. She read it and walked directly to the office of the senior partner. By 11 o'clock, Holt and Mercer had filed an emergency motion with the Harlan County Circuit Court documenting unauthorized access to an asset under active third-party legal protection. The motion requested immediate judicial review and preservation of contents. By 11:40, a deputy clerk of court had contacted the Harlan County Sheriff's Office. By noon, 2 deputies were pulling into the parking lot of Harlan Savings and Trust. Virgil was still in the chair by the front window. He had finished the letters to the editor and moved to the farm report on the back page. He heard the door open and looked up and saw Owen Briggs' nephew, a deputy named Cal Briggs who had his uncle's build and his uncle's habit of removing his hat when he came indoors. Walk in with another deputy behind him. Cal looked around the lobby and his eyes found Virgil's and he stopped. He said, Virgil, you need to come with me, please. Virgil folded the newspaper carefully along its original crease. He said, Is there a problem? Cal said, There may be. I need you in the back. He stood up, set the folded newspaper on the chair beside him in case anyone else wanted it, and followed the deputies toward the rear of the branch. Slater's office door was open. The branch manager was on the phone when the deputies passed, and he looked up, his expression moving through confusion, irritation, something adjacent to fear, before settling on the professional composure that was his default. He ended the call and came to his doorway. He said, What is happening? Cal said. Sir, we have an emergency court filing regarding a legal hold on a safe deposit box in this branch. I need to know who authorized access to Box 114 this morning. Slater looked at the deputies. He looked at Virgil standing quietly in the hallway with his newspaper under his arm. He looked at May, who had appeared in the doorway of the open office and was standing with her hands clasped in front of her, watching. He said, I authorized it. It was part of a scheduled renovation clearing. The hold had been reviewed and cleared by our compliance team. Cal said, Yes, sir. The court is going to want to talk to someone about that. The contents of Box 114 were documented under judicial supervision that afternoon. A circuit court representative arrived at 2:15. An attorney from Holt and Mercer arrived at 2:40. Slater sat in his office with his branch attorney, who had driven from Lexington in under 2 hours and who had not spoken more words than were absolutely necessary since arriving, because there are moments in professional life when a lawyer's silence communicates more clearly than any sentence they might construct. The tin box was opened first. Inside, wrapped in a square of cloth that had once been a dish towel with a blue stripe along the hem, was a cassette tape in a sealed Ziploc freezer bag. The label on the tape was written in ballpoint pen in handwriting that was careful without being elegant. It read R. Keller, October 14, 1997, Harlan Savings and Trust Protection Agreement. Witness O. Briggs. The Holt and Mercer attorney looked at the tape for a long moment. She asked if the branch had a cassette player. Nobody did. Curtis drove to the Radio Shack on the other side of town and came back with a portable player that still had a markdown sticker on it from a clearance sale. He plugged it in. Nobody laughed about it, which told you something about the mood in the room. The tape played. Roland Keller's voice came out of the small speaker with the particular quality of voices recorded on analog equipment in 1997, slightly warm, slightly close. The way a person sounds when they are sitting across a kitchen table from a microphone. He identified himself clearly. He stated the date. He described the loan arrangement. He read the protection clause aloud, slowly, pausing at each provision. His voice did not waver. He spoke like a man who understood that this recording might one day need to stand in a room without him and wanted to make sure it could do so on its own. At the end of the recording, a second voice confirmed the proceedings. Owen Briggs, identifying himself by name and his notary public commission number, stating that he had witnessed the signing of the agreement and that the contents of the recording accurately reflected the terms as executed. The room was quiet when the tape ended. The Holt and Mercer attorney made a note on her legal pad and did not look up from it. The envelopes were opened next, in order, each one documented and photographed before being examined. The first contained the original protection clause, 4 pages, signed by Roland Keller as bank president, signed by Virgil Boone, notarized by Owen Briggs. The language was precise and unusually comprehensive for a document drafted in a small-town attorney's office in 1997. Graham Holt had been a careful lawyer. The clause covered land, accounts, held assets, and any storage instrument held at the institution, and it included a provision that the branch attorney read twice, stating that any unauthorized access to a protected asset by any agent of the bank would constitute a material breach of contract and would trigger a right of action for damages, including but not limited to legal costs, consequential losses, and reputational harm. The second envelope contained the original loan agreement, $47,000, zero interest, repaid in full, April 2001. The repayment confirmation was attached, signed by Roland Keller and witnessed by the same notary. The third envelope contained the USDA land grant certification, case file 1991-KY-0047, 80 acres, Harlan County, Virgil James Boone, sole owner. The document carried the seal of the United States Department of Agriculture and the signature of the regional director for the Appalachian Recovery Program. It was printed on paper that had not yellowed because it had been stored correctly, and it was as legally clear and unambiguous as any document of its kind that the court representative had encountered in 14 years of this work. The fourth envelope contained something nobody in that room had expected. It was a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, dated February 2003, 2 weeks before Roland Keller died. It was addressed to whoever opens this box after I am gone. Roland had written it knowing his heart was not reliable, in the plain language of a man who wants to be understood after he can no longer explain himself. He described Virgil Boone. He described what Virgil had done in the fall of 1996 and what it had meant and what the bank would not have been without it. He described the morning Virgil had set the cashier's checks on his desk and said, "You are not taking it. I am lending it." He wrote that he had known many generous people in his life, but had not known another who gave everything and asked for nothing and then refused to let you feel indebted. He wrote that the protection clause was not a legal formality. It was a promise. And he wrote that he hoped, if anyone ever needed to read this letter, the promise would hold. Slater was not in the room when the letter was read. His attorney had advised him to return to his office and wait. He sat at his desk and listened to the faint movement of people down the hall and understood, from the shape of the silence between those sounds, that the architecture of the morning he thought he had constructed was coming apart in a way he could not stop. He had spent 22 years building a professional life on the premise that everything had a price and everything had a process, and if you knew the process and could name the price, you could move any obstacle in front of you. He had believed this not because he was cynical, but because it had been reliably true in every situation he had ever encountered. He had a formula for everything. He did not have a formula for a man who lent everything he owned to a friend, kept the receipt in a tin box for 27 years, and paid $50 a month for 2 decades, not because he expected to use it, but because the keeping was the point, because arrangements meant something, because Roland Keller's voice on a cassette tape meant something even after Roland Keller was gone. The Holt and Mercer attorney finished her documentation at 4:55. On her way out through the lobby, she stopped at May's window, set a business card on the counter with her direct number written on the back, and continued without a word. May picked it up, looked at it, and put it in her cardigan pocket next to the folded copies she had made that morning. Outside, Owen Briggs was leaning against the passenger door of the old Chevy. He was 72 years old and had driven himself over from his house on Mound Street when Cal called to tell him what was happening. He had a thermos and 2 cups and poured one without being asked and handed it across when Virgil came out of the bank and walked to the truck. They stood without talking and drank their coffee. The sky over the ridge to the west had gone from blue to the deep orange that precedes the gray, the color that Harlan County evenings went when the weather was clear and the air had enough moisture to catch the last of the sun. Owen said, "Cal told me what they found in there," Virgil said. "It was always in there." Owen said, "I know it was. I was there when you put it in." A moment passed. A truck went by on the main road. Somewhere nearby, a dog made its opinion known about something in the next yard. Owen said, "Roland would have liked to see today." Virgil looked at the ridgeline. He said, "Roland would have said he told me so." Owen made a sound that was not quite a laugh but held its shape. Inside the building, Slater was on the phone with the regional vice president. His voice was measured. It was always measured. One of the things he was genuinely good at. He was explaining the situation in the language of process and unforeseen legal complexity. The regional vice president was not saying much. When men in his position go quiet, it is not because they have nothing to say. At 5:30, the board's general counsel called the branch directly on the landline. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Slater sat with his hands on his desk. The expansion plan was done, not paused, not delayed, done. The math of the project only worked with that specific parcel, and there was no legal mechanism available to the bank that could reach that parcel now. Holt and Mercer had seen to that in February 2003 when Graham Holt had embedded the notification flag in the branch system, renewed the legal hold documentation, and filed the updated protection agreement with the Harlan County Circuit Court clerk as a matter of public record, which meant it had always been findable by anyone who looked in the right place. He opened the third drawer of his credenza for the first time. He looked at the architectural drawings, the conference room on the second floor, the drive-through lanes, the Route 421 frontage that made the whole design work. He looked at them for a moment, then slid them back into the drawer and closed it. Everything he had put in motion was now moving in a direction he had not intended and could not correct. Down the hall, May was the last junior employee in the building. She stayed because she was the kind of person who, when something important has happened, needs to understand it before she can leave it. She sat at her desk with the account record on her screen and the folded copies in her cardigan and the business card beside her keyboard. She had not said much today. She had not needed to. She had made one decision that morning, a small one. The decision to make copies before processing an authorization that felt wrong in a way she could not immediately articulate, and that decision had mattered in a way she had not fully understood when she made it. She turned off her monitor, put on her coat, and walked out through the lobby into the parking lot, which was empty now except for one car still parked in the reserved space near the door. She did not look at it. She drove home. In his own office, Slater sat alone in a building that was almost entirely dark. He had not moved from his desk in 40 minutes. Outside his window, the parking lot lights had come on, and the street beyond was quiet, and the ridge line to the east was nothing but a black edge against a sky that was letting go of its last color. He was not a man given to reflection in the way that word usually implies, but he was sitting very still. And the stillness had a different quality than the stillness of a man who is planning his next action. It was the stillness of a man who is beginning to understand that the next action is not his to plan. He turned off his desk lamp. He sat in the dark for another moment. Then he got up and walked out. The Holt and Mercer filing reached the Harlan County Circuit Court the previous afternoon as an emergency motion, and Judge Patricia Lowe had been on the bench for 19 years. She had handled foreclosures and property disputes and contract cases and the full range of things that happen when money and land and human stubbornness occupy the same legal space. She read the filing at home after dinner and read it again at 6 the next morning and called her clerk at 7:15 to say she wanted the docket cleared for a preliminary hearing by end of week. The bank's general counsel flew in from Cincinnati on Thursday. His name was Richard Mercer, no relation to the Mercer in Holt and Mercer, a fact that had required clarification twice already in written correspondence and would require it again. He was 58 years old and had spent 30 years managing legal exposure for financial institutions, and he wore a particular expression when he walked into situations that had been allowed to develop further than they should have been allowed to develop, a kind of controlled stillness that his colleagues had learned to read accurately as a measure of how serious things had become. The stillness, in this instance, was considerable. He met with Slater for 40 minutes, and at the end of those 40 minutes told him to take the remainder of the week as administrative leave pending the outcome of the preliminary hearing. He said it without anger, the way a structural engineer tells you a load-bearing wall needs to come down, as a fact about the world rather than a judgment about anything. Slater drove home at 11 on a Thursday morning with his parking pass still on the dashboard and his nameplate still on his office door, and the architectural drawings still in the third drawer of the credenza he had opened once and closed. He sat in his own driveway for a while. He could trace every procedural error. He could identify the specific document he should have read more carefully, the specific call he should have taken more seriously. He could map all of it. What he could not do was arrive at a genuine understanding of why a 68-year-old farmer on a gravel road in Harlan County had been, from the beginning, something other than an obstacle with a price. That was the gap in him. It was not new. He had simply never encountered a situation that made it visible. The preliminary hearing was held on a Friday morning. Virgil was there, seated at the table on the left side of the courtroom with Claire Donovan, the Holt and Mercer attorney, a woman with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, who had the practiced unhurriedness of someone who knows exactly how much time she needs and has long since stopped explaining that to people who are in a hurry. Owen sat in the gallery in the second row, hat on his knee, back straight. The bank was represented by Richard Mercer and a local attorney who handled Kentucky procedure. Slater was not present. Judge Lowe entered at 9:15 and read the filing summary without preamble, then asked Claire to walk her through the material facts. Claire walked her through them. The judge listened without interrupting. When Claire finished, Judge Lowe looked at Richard Mercer and asked him to address whether the compliance clearance of the legal hold flag had been conducted with awareness of the original 1997 protection agreement. Richard Mercer said he could not confirm that at this stage of the review. The judge said, "Can you confirm it was not?" Richard Mercer said he could not confirm that either at this stage. The judge said, "Then what can you confirm?" Richard Mercer said he could confirm that the bank took full responsibility for the procedural failure and was committed to resolving the matter equitably. Judge Lowe looked at him for a moment with the expression of a person who has heard that sentence many times and finds it less informative each time. She said, "Equitably is a word that covers a great deal of ground. Mr. Mercer, let us be more specific about which part of the ground we are talking about." The hearing lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. At the end of it, the judge issued a preliminary order confirming that the protection clause of the 1997 agreement remained legally valid and enforceable, that the unauthorized access to Box 114 constituted a breach of that agreement as written, that all assets of Virgil James Boone were to remain free from any encumbrance or action by Harlan Savings and Trust or its parent company pending resolution of proceedings, and that a full hearing on damages would be scheduled within 60 days. She also noted for the record that the USDA land grant certification established clear and unencumbered title to the 80-acre parcel and that no claim of the bank had any standing with respect to that property. She closed the session at 11:55. In the hallway outside, Claire made a brief call to her office. Virgil stood near the window at the end of the hall and looked out at the street and the ridgeline beyond it. Owen came and stood beside him. Owen said, "Patricia Lowe has been on that bench since before Cal made deputy." Virgil said, "She reads things carefully." Owen said, "She does." They walked down the stairs and out into the November air. The 60 days moved with the particular weight of time when things remain unresolved. During those weeks, the bank's internal audit uncovered what Richard Mercer had suspected from the morning he arrived in Harlan. The compliance clearance had been performed by a junior analyst in the Louisville office who had searched for active litigation, found none, and cleared the flag without accessing the original 1997 paper documentation, which predated the digital conversion and had never been scanned into the system. The analyst had followed the procedure as written. The procedure as written was insufficient. That distinction carried significant consequences for several people in the compliance chain. The audit also surfaced something the original research firm had not found. In account records from 2 previous branches where Slater had worked, in Columbus and a smaller branch in Western Ohio, there were documented instances of safe deposit box access that preceded purchase negotiations for adjacent properties. The pattern was recognizable to people who knew what they were looking at, and the general counsel's office now had people looking at it carefully. Slater's administrative leave became a termination in the 4th week. The bank's press statement used the phrase separation by mutual agreement. Nobody who knew how these things worked was confused about what it meant. He cleaned out his office on a Tuesday when the branch was closed. One box. The nameplate went in last. He drove to the house he rented on the east side of town and made himself a sandwich and ate it at the counter and did not taste it. That evening, he drove to Route 421. He had told himself he was not going to do this. He told himself it served no purpose and that he was not the kind of man who made gestures that served no purpose. Both of those things were true, and he went anyway, which told him something about himself that he filed without examining. He pulled into the gravel drive just before dark. The farmhouse lights were on. The old Chevy sat in its spot. He got out and crossed the gravel. Virgil was on the porch. He had heard the car and stood at the top of the steps with his coffee, watching the man come across the gravel. Slater stopped at the base of the steps. He said, "I am not here in any official capacity. There is no official capacity left for me to be here in." Virgil said nothing. Slater said, "I wanted to tell you directly that what happened with the box was wrong. I knew the hold was there. My attorney told me clearly what it meant. I chose to proceed anyway because I had decided that what I was trying to accomplish was more important than what a piece of paper from 1997 was trying to protect. I was wrong about that. I do not know if that matters to you." Virgil looked at him, not with anger, not with the satisfaction a man might be entitled to feel in this situation. He looked at Slater the way you look at something you have understood for a long time and have not needed to say anything about. He said, "It matters, but it does not change anything about the land." Slater said, "I know that. I came because I thought I should say it to your face instead of through lawyers and filings and the language that institutions use when they are trying to manage what they owe." He reached into his coat and took out an envelope. He said, "This is not from the bank. It is personal. It is not enough, and I know it is not enough." Virgil did not move toward the envelope. He said, "I am not interested in your personal money, son." He said it without contempt. He said it the way a man states something simply true about himself. Slater said, "Then what would you have me do?" Virgil was quiet for a moment. He looked out toward the east field, the tree line barely visible against the darkening sky, and then back at the man standing at the base of his steps. He said, "My wife is buried at the east fence. You want to buy that too?" Slater stood there. He put the envelope back in his coat. He said something quiet that may have been "thank you." Then he walked back to his car and drove down the gravel and turned onto Route 421 and was gone. Virgil stood on the porch until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then he went inside and set his cup on the counter and did not think about Derek Slater again. The full hearing on damages was held in January. Claire had prepared the case with the thoroughness of someone who does not believe in leaving questions unanswered. She quantified the breach with precision legal costs at their actual value. Consequential losses from the bank's pressure campaign on Virgil's ability to conduct routine financial business during the negotiation period, and reputational harm, which she did not overstate because she had learned over 20 years that judges respond to restraint in ways that juries sometimes do not. She also presented the pattern documentation from the bank's own internal audit, the Ohio records, not as direct evidence in this case, but as context for the court's understanding of how the breach in Harlan fit within a broader practice. Richard Mercer offered a settlement in the second week of January, before the hearing concluded. Claire brought it to Virgil in the conference room at the Lexington office, a room with a long table and good windows and the particular hush of a place where important things get decided quietly. She set the figure in front of him. Virgil looked at it. He said, "What happens to the land?" She said, "The land is yours regardless. The November order is permanent. The settlement covers the damages from the breach. The land is a separate matter, and it is settled in your favor already," he said, "and the bank does not contest what Rowland put in writing." She said, "They cannot. The documentation is unambiguous, and the tape confirms it. They are not contesting the agreement. They are paying for having violated it." He was quiet for a moment. He said, Dorothy used to say that the only thing worse than being cheated is spending the rest of your life being angry about it. She said anger was the tax you paid on being cheated, and she refused to pay it. Claire waited. He said, I will accept the settlement. I want one condition that is not in that document. She said, Tell me. He said, I want the bank to fund the restoration of the agricultural equipment lending program that Roland ran in the 90s for small farms in this county. Not a large number, a sustainable number, something that continues. Roland built something real, and it should not have ended when he did. Claire looked at him across the table. She said, I can put that in writing. He said, Then I will sign. She put it in writing. The bank agreed without negotiation, which told you everything about where they understood themselves to be. Virgil signed on a Thursday. Owen drove him to Lexington, and they had lunch at a diner near the university that had been there since the 1970s and served food that did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. Owen had the hot turkey sandwich. Virgil had the coffee and pie, which was peach. Not as good as Dorothy's had been, but good enough for a January afternoon in a warm room with a friend across the table. Owen said, Roland would have liked that. The lending program. Virgil said, It was his idea to begin with. I am just putting it back where it belongs. Owen said, You know people are going to hear about this and want to make a story out of it. The kind where you are the hero and Slater is the villain, and there is a lesson at the end. Virgil said, There is a lesson. Owen said, What is it? Virgil thought about it. He said, Keep your paperwork in order, pay what you owe on time, and do not sell anything that was never yours to sell. Owen said, That is 3 lessons. Virgil said, Some things come in sets. Owen made the sound that was not quite a laugh but held its shape and poured more coffee from the carafe on the table. May Carver gave her statement to the bank's internal audit in December, calmly and without embellishment, producing the copies she had made the morning of the access. Her statement was one of several that documented the procedural failure at the branch level. She had not been disciplined. The audit concluded that her decision to preserve documentation she had recognized as potentially significant had been appropriate and had contributed materially to the resolution of the matter. A letter acknowledging this arrived from the General Counsel's office in February. She read it twice and filed it. She was still at the branch, under interim management, while the parent company determined next steps. She did her work the way she had always done it, and she thought sometimes about Roland Keller's voice coming out of that small portable player on a November afternoon, steady and unhurried, and speaking from 27 years away into a room full of people who had not expected to hear anything like it. She thought about what it meant to build something carefully enough that it could hold without you. She had processed hundreds of account records in 3 years and had never once thought about them the way she thought about Box 114. She thought she was probably going to think about it for a long time. Spring arrived in Harlan County the way it always arrived, the cold loosening its grip on the ridge soil 1 degree at a time, until one morning you stepped outside and the air had shifted, and the shift was unmistakable. The east field was greening up from the fence line inward. From the edges first, where the soil drained and the sun reached longest, filling toward the center the way fields fill in Kentucky in March when the ground is ready. Virgil was at the east fence checking the post he had reset in November. It had held through the winter. The concrete had set clean, and the post stood plumb, and the wire ran taut without any of the sag that signals trouble coming. He ran his hand along the wire. Not because he expected a problem, but because the check was the thing, the attention was the thing, the practice of confirming that what you have built continues to hold. He pulled on the wire. It held. He walked the fence line to the south corner, checking each post in turn, and then turned and walked back toward the house. The morning light was coming over the ridge clean and direct, without the apologetic quality that winter light carries. He could see the kitchen window from here, and the garden plot beside it where Dorothy had grown tomatoes and peppers and a patch of mint that had spread far beyond its intended boundaries, which Virgil had never reduced because the smell of it in July, when you brushed against it, was a thing he was not willing to give up. He stopped in the middle of the field. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the house and the barn and the truck on the gravel and the ridge behind it all and the sky above the ridge that was the particular blue Kentucky gets in March when the conditions are right. 80 acres, his, as it had always been. The key ring was in his jacket pocket, the truck key, and the small brass key for box 114 worn smooth at the teeth from 27 years of being carried. He took it out and turned it once in his hand. There was no box to pay for now, no document left to protect. The thing Roland had promised was still true and would remain true, and the key was just a key again, small and ordinary and worn to the shape of having mattered. He closed his hand around it for a moment. Then he put it back in his pocket and walked toward the house. The coffee was ready when he came in. He poured a cup and took it to the kitchen table and sat down. The chair across from him was empty the way it had been empty for 27 years, and the emptiness was not only grief anymore, but also a kind of presence. The way people who shape everything about how you live continue to occupy the space around you long after they are gone. He thought about Roland, the Sunday evening call in 1996, the careful honesty in his voice. The morning the cashier's checks went on the desk and Roland said, "I cannot take this," and Virgil said, "You are not taking it." The letter in the fourth envelope that Claire had read aloud in that conference room with the stillness of someone carrying words that belonged to a person who is no longer present to carry them himself. A man's worth is often found in the silence he keeps. Not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of a man who has arranged his affairs carefully and trusts those arrangements to speak when speaking is required. Roland had understood that. He had written it into a contract and spoken it onto a tape and trusted it to a box in a bank in a small Kentucky county, and he had been right to trust it, because things built correctly do not require their builder to stay alive in order to hold. Outside, the east field was greening toward the center. The mint was there beside the garden, spreading further than it was supposed to, exactly as it always had. Some things, once rooted correctly, do not require tending. They simply hold.
When I was young, I chased the horizon. Certain peace was waiting there. I thought the storms were wrong turns taken, and every burden was unfair. So I spent years fighting the mountains, cursing every winding road, never seeing that the struggle was the thing that made me grow. The eagle learns within the wind, the oak grows strong beneath the snow, and every soul that's worth becoming must walk where harder paths may go. The road was never meant to be easy, the storm was never meant to pass. The waves were not there to stop me, they were there to teach me how to last. Every trial is part of the journey, every scar becomes a guide. The mountain is not in my way, the mountain is the reason for the climb. I've known loss that left me broken, I've known fear that stole my breath, I've known nights so cold and endless I could barely take one step. Yet every wound became a teacher, every failure left a mark, would never separate all this time. The